Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Last October, my wife Jennifer and I drove down to the Gulf Coast for our 10th anniversary. We'd been saving up for months, putting away every extra dollar we could find, and finally booked this gorgeous beachfront condo in a small Florida town called Pelican Bay. The rental photos showed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pristine white sand, a massive king bed with ocean views, and this charming vintage decor that Jennifer absolutely loved. We arrived on a Sunday afternoon, exhausted from the 8-hour drive but buzzing with excitement. The building was one of those older complexes from the 80s, painted this faded coral pink that had probably been vibrant 30 years ago. The property manager, a guy named Carl with deep-set eyes and fingernails bitten down to the quick, met us in the lobby and handed over the keys while barely making eye contact. The first night was perfect. We opened all the windows, listened to the waves, shared a bottle of wine on the balcony while watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. But around 2 in the morning, I woke up to this smell drifting through the bedroom. It was subtle at first, like maybe a mouse had died in the walls. That sweet, sick odor that makes your throat close up. Jennifer was still asleep, her face peaceful against the pillow. So I got up quietly and checked around the room, sniffing near the baseboards and air vents. The smell seemed strongest near the closet, a walk-in with mirrored doors that reflected the moonlight coming through the windows. I opened it carefully, trying not to wake Jennifer, and the odor hit me like a physical force. Thick, cloying, unmistakably the smell of decay. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to look around the closet. It was mostly empty, except for some extra pillows on the top shelf and a few wire hangers that jangled when I brushed against them. The smell was definitely coming from somewhere inside, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact source. The next morning I called Carl while Jennifer was in the shower. He answered on the 6th ring, sounding annoyed that I'd interrupted his Monday morning. When I explained about the smell, he immediately launched into this rehearsed-sounding speech about how the building's plumbing was old, how sometimes the pipes backed up, how the salt air made everything corrode faster than usual. He promised to send someone to check it out when they got a chance, which I knew meant never. Jennifer noticed the smell as soon as she walked into the bedroom that morning, wrinkling her nose and asking if maybe a seagull had gotten trapped in the attic and died. We tried to make the best of it, spending most of Monday on the beach, swimming in the surprisingly warm October water, and hunting for sand dollars along the shoreline. But every time we went back to the condo to grab sunscreen or water, that smell would hit us, getting stronger as the day heated up. By evening, it was unbearable. Jennifer had started getting headaches, and I noticed she kept touching her throat like she was trying not to gag. We moved our suitcases to the living room and decided to sleep on the pull-out couch, keeping the bedroom door shut tight with towels stuffed under the gap. Around midnight, I couldn't stand it anymore. I told Jennifer I was going to take another look in that closet, maybe move things around and find whatever was causing the stench. Armed with my phone's flashlight and a dish rag tied around my nose and mouth, I went back into the bedroom. The smell had gotten so bad that my eyes started watering immediately. In the closet, I pushed aside the hanging clothes rod and started examining the walls more carefully. The back wall had this weird textured wallpaper, like bamboo print from the 70s, peeling at the corners. When I pressed on it, one section felt different, hollow, like there was space behind it. I found a seam in the wallpaper near the floor and started pulling. The paper came away easily, too easily, revealing what looked like a piece of drywall that had been cut and poorly replaced. There were fingerprints in the dried joint compound around the edges, and I could see where someone had done a rushed patch job. The smell was definitely coming from behind this section of wall. I knew I should stop, call the police maybe, or at least wait until morning. But something made me keep going. Maybe it was anger at having our anniversary ruined, or maybe just the need to know what was causing this nightmare. I went to the kitchen and found a butter knife, then came back and started prying at the edges of the drywall patch. It popped out after a few minutes of work, revealing a dark cavity about 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. The smell that rushed out made me stumble backward, retching into the dish rag. I had to sit on the bed for a minute, breathing through my mouth and fighting the urge to vomit. When I finally worked up the courage to shine my light into the hole, I saw wrapped bundles like packages wrapped in clear plastic and duct tape, stacked carefully in the space. The packages were different sizes, some long and narrow, others round and compact, all wrapped meticulously in layers of plastic sheeting. Through the semi-transparent wrapping, I could make out dark mottled shapes inside. One package near the front had torn slightly, probably from age or heat, and something pale was visible through the gap. I leaned closer, holding my breath, and that's when I saw it. A human hand, gray-green with decomposition, the fingers curled into a claw. The wedding ring was still on the 4th finger, a simple gold band that caught the light from my phone. I scrambled backward so fast I knocked over the nightstand, sending the lamp crashing to the floor. Jennifer called out from the living room, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't form words. I just stood there, staring at that hole in the wall, my mind trying to process what I'd found. I must have stood there for 5 minutes before my brain kicked back into gear. I took photos of everything, the hole, the packages, the visible hand, then carefully replaced the drywall piece, though my fingers were trembling so badly I could barely hold it in place. I walked out to the living room trying to keep my face neutral and told Jennifer we needed to leave immediately. She started asking questions, but something in my expression must have scared her because she stopped mid-sentence and started packing. While she threw our things into suitcases, I called 911 from the balcony, speaking in a low voice so she wouldn't hear the details. The dispatcher kept asking me to repeat myself, like she couldn't believe what I was saying. They told us to get out of the condo and wait in our car, that officers were on their way. The police arrived in force, 3 patrol cars, then detectives, then crime scene technicians in white suits who sealed off the entire building. We sat in our car for hours, watching officers go in and out, their faces grim. A detective named Hoffman, a tall woman with prematurely gray hair pulled into a tight bun, interviewed us separately. She asked about Carl, about when we'd booked the rental, about whether we'd noticed anything else unusual. I mentioned Carl's nervous behavior, how quickly he'd dismissed the smell, and she wrote everything down in a small spiral notebook. Around 3 in the morning, they brought Carl in for questioning. I watched him in the back of the patrol car, his head down, shoulders shaking. Jennifer kept asking me what I'd found, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth yet. I just held her hand and said the police would explain everything. Hoffman came back to our car around sunrise with an update that made everything infinitely worse. They'd found 7 bodies in various states of decomposition, all wrapped and hidden in different spots throughout the building, inside walls, under floorboards, in sealed sections of the attic. The oldest remains were from about 8 years ago, the newest maybe 6 months. All were renters who had supposedly checked out early or left without notice, according to the rental records. Carl had been the property manager for 12 years, living in a unit on the ground floor, keeping meticulous records of every guest. She said he'd been surprisingly cooperative once they'd confronted him with the evidence, almost relieved to be caught. The victims were people traveling alone, or couples without family checking in on them regularly. People whose disappearances wouldn't immediately raise alarms. The investigation took over the entire town. News vans arrived before noon, reporters interviewing anyone who'd ever stayed at the complex. Jennifer and I gave our statements at the police station, a squat concrete building that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial disinfectant. They put us up in a hotel 20 miles away, comped by the city, while they processed the crime scene. I finally told Jennifer everything while we sat on the hotel bed, both of us still in the clothes we'd been wearing for 36 hours. She cried, then got angry, then cried again. We tried to eat but couldn't keep anything down. The detective called us 2 days later to say they'd identified 3 of the victims through dental records and DNA. A traveling nurse from Oregon, a retired teacher from Canada, and a young couple from Japan who'd been on their honeymoon. The other victims were still being processed. Carl had confessed to everything, claiming the first death was an accident during a robbery, and the rest were to cover it up, though the detectives believed he'd been lying about his motives. We drove home in complete silence, stopping only for gas and bathroom breaks. Jennifer hasn't been able to sleep in our own bedroom since we got back. She says she can still smell that odor, even though I've told her it's impossible. We've both been in therapy, trying to process what happened, but some things just don't fit into neat psychological boxes. The detective called last month to tell us Carl had been sentenced to life without parole, that all the victims had finally been identified and their families notified. She thanked us for our help, said we'd brought closure to a lot of people. But closure feels like the wrong word when I still wake up at 2 in the morning, convinced I can smell that sweet, sick stench drifting through our house. Jennifer wants us to renew our vows next year, to reclaim our anniversary from this nightmare. I agreed, but we're going to the mountains this time, somewhere far from the ocean, somewhere with no closets to hide secrets, somewhere we can pretend that people don't do unspeakable things in places meant for making memories. The rental car's GPS had been acting weird for the past hour, but my wife Jessica and I didn't really mind getting lost in the French countryside that August afternoon. We were 2 weeks into our anniversary trip, driving through those endless sunflower fields between Lyon and Avignon, taking whatever back roads looked interesting. I was 34 then, teaching high school history in Denver, and Jess was running her online jewelry business. We'd saved for 3 years for this trip, and honestly, getting away from the tourist spots was exactly what we wanted. Around 4 in the afternoon, we spotted this incredible abandoned farmhouse set back from the road, all weathered stone and collapsed wooden beams, with wildflowers growing through what used to be windows. The light was hitting it just right, that golden European summer light photographers go crazy for, and Jess immediately grabbed her camera from the back seat. We pulled over onto this dirt patch beside the road, maybe 50 yards from the farmhouse. The whole area was dead quiet except for some cicadas buzzing in the heat. While Jess was adjusting her camera settings, I noticed there was actually a newer metal shed about 100 feet behind the old farmhouse. One of those prefab agricultural storage buildings that looked completely out of place next to all that ancient stone. 2 beat-up white vans were parked beside it, both with mud-caked license plates, and the shed's door was propped open with a concrete block. I was about to point it out to Jess when movement caught my eye. 2 men emerged from that shed, and they were dragging something between them, something wrapped in a blue industrial tarp that must have been 7 feet long and obviously heavy from how they were struggling with it. The guy in front was massive, wearing a stained yellow work shirt, bald with these thick red hands gripping the tarp. The other one was skinnier, younger maybe, in dirty jeans and a baseball cap, walking backwards and breathing hard from the effort. At first, my brain tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe they were moving old equipment or disposing of some farming supplies. But there was something about how carefully they were moving, how they kept glancing around between steps, that made my chest tighten. The tarp had these dark, wet patches seeping through in places, and when the skinny one adjusted his grip, part of it fell open for just a second. I saw something pale, like flesh, before he quickly tucked it back. That's when they noticed us. The bald one stopped mid-step and just stared directly at our car. He said something sharp to his partner, who spun around so fast he almost dropped his end. For maybe 5 seconds, nobody moved. Jess was still fiddling with her camera, completely oblivious, talking about the afternoon shadows on the farmhouse walls. The 2 men slowly lowered whatever they were carrying to the ground, right there in the tall grass between the shed and a grove of scraggly olive trees. The bald one reached into the shed and came out with a shovel, one of those long-handled spades with a pointed tip. He handed another one to his partner, who took it without ever taking his eyes off our car. Then they started walking toward us. Not running, not even walking fast, just this steady, purposeful stride through the yellow grass. The younger one had pulled his cap down low, but I could see his mouth moving like he was talking to himself, or maybe praying. The bald one's face was completely blank, emotionless, like someone heading out to do a chore they'd done 100 times before. They were maybe 70 yards away when Jess finally looked up and saw them. She lowered her camera slowly and grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "Nathan," she whispered, "get in the car right now." Her voice had this controlled panic that made my whole body go rigid. I fumbled with the keys, dropping them once before managing to start the engine. The men were maybe 40 yards away now, and the bald one had shifted his grip on the shovel, holding it more like a weapon than a tool. Jess was already buckled in, her camera forgotten on the floor, repeatedly checking that her door was locked. The car started on the second try, and I threw it into drive, spraying gravel as we lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, I saw them stop walking and just stand there in the middle of the road watching us leave. The younger one dropped his shovel and ran back toward the vans, and that's when real fear hit me. They were going to follow us. The road ahead curved through dense woods, and I had no idea where it led or how far the next town was. Our rental Peugeot wasn't exactly built for speed, and those vans looked like they knew these roads. I pushed the accelerator harder, taking the curves way too fast, the tires squealing against the hot asphalt. Jess had her phone out trying to call the police, but we had no signal. She kept hitting redial over and over, her breathing getting more frantic each time it failed. About 2 minutes later, I saw white metal in the mirror coming up fast. Just one van, but it was gaining on us. The road narrowed ahead, barely wide enough for 2 cars, with drainage ditches on both sides. I knew if they got alongside us, they could force us off into those ditches. My mind was racing through options that all seemed impossible. Turn around. No room. Pull over and run into the woods. They'd catch us in seconds. Keep driving and hope we reached civilization first. The van was close enough now that I could see the bald one driving, his face still wearing that same blank expression. He wasn't even trying to ram us or run us off the road, just staying right on our bumper, patient, like he knew exactly how this would end. Then Jess did something I'll never forget. She turned around in her seat, pointed her camera at the van behind us, and started taking pictures. The flash went off repeatedly, lighting up the interior of our car like lightning strikes. "Evidence," she kept saying through gritted teeth. "We need evidence." The bald man's expression finally changed when that flash hit him. He raised one hand to shield his eyes, and the van swerved slightly. That's when I saw our chance. There was a sharp left turn coming up, barely visible through the trees marked by an old stone cross. I didn't signal, didn't brake, just yanked the wheel hard at the last second. We went into that turn on 2 wheels, Jess screaming, stuff flying everywhere in the car. The van shot past the turn, brakes shrieking, trying to stop. By the time he'd reversed and made the turn, we'd gained maybe 30 seconds. The new road was even narrower, climbing steeply through thick forest. But up ahead I could see buildings, actual houses with cars parked outside and laundry hanging on lines. We burst into what turned out to be a small village, maybe 20 houses clustered around an old church. I pulled right up to what looked like a cafe, where a group of old men were sitting outside playing cards. We practically fell out of the car, Jess still clutching her camera, both of us probably looking absolutely insane. I tried to explain in my broken French what had happened, showing them the direction we'd come from. One of the old men, wearing suspenders and a faded blue cap, stood up immediately and walked to the middle of the street, standing there with his arms crossed. Within maybe a minute, 5 or 6 other villagers had joined him, forming this human barrier across the road. When the white van came around the corner moments later and saw them all standing there, it slowed, stopped, and then reversed back the way it came. The old man walked over to us, put a weathered hand on my shoulder, and in accented English said, "Those men, they are known here. You are lucky to find us. Come inside now." Inside the cafe, the owner's wife brought us water and strong coffee while her husband called the police. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely hold the cup. The old man, whose name was Philippe, sat with us and explained in halting English mixed with French that those men operated from that abandoned farm, had been suspected of things for years, but nobody could prove anything. "People disappear sometimes," he said quietly. Hikers, tourists who camp alone. The police search, but he shrugged in that way that meant everything and nothing. Jess showed him the pictures on her camera. She'd managed to get 3 clear shots: the van's license plate, the bald man's face through the windshield, and 1 blurry image of both men standing by the shed before we fled. Felipe looked at them for a long moment, then called over 2 other men from the village. They spoke in rapid French, voices getting louder, angrier. One of them, a younger guy in work clothes, pulled out his phone and made a call. Within 20 minutes, 2 police cars arrived, followed by a 3rd unmarked vehicle. The rest of that day became a blur of police statements, translators, and waiting. They took Jess's camera as evidence, gave us receipts, contact information. 2 officers escorted us back to our hotel in Avignon, followed us right to the parking garage to make sure we got there safely. The detective, a woman with short gray hair and tired eyes, told us they'd been investigating similar incidents for 3 years, but this was the first time anyone had gotten photos, the first time witnesses had gotten away to report it immediately. She said they were heading to the farm right then with a full team. We spent that night in our hotel room with chairs pushed against the door, taking turns staying awake, jumping at every sound in the hallway. The next morning, the detective called our room. They'd found the tarp, she said, with traces of blood and evidence of recent digging in the olive grove. The men were gone, the vans were gone, but they had the photos. They had names now, and there was already a manhunt across 3 regions. We cut our trip short, flew home 2 days later. For weeks afterward, I'd wake up in cold sweats, seeing that bald man's empty face in my dreams, that steady walk through the tall grass with the shovel. Jess couldn't look at her photography equipment for months. The French police stayed in contact through email, sending updates when they could. 6 weeks after we got home, we received a call from the detective. They'd caught them, both men, trying to cross into Spain with fake papers. In the younger one's van, they found rope, tarps, shovels, and other things she wouldn't specify over the phone. The investigation had linked them to at least 4 missing persons cases over 5 years. She said our photos, our escape, and most importantly, us leading them to that village where witnesses saw everything, had been the break they needed. The trial would take months, maybe years, but they had them. We'd have to testify eventually, probably by video link, but for now we were safe. She thanked us for our courage, though I told her it wasn't courage, just pure terror and luck that got us to that village. It's been 2 years now since that afternoon in the French countryside. Jess started taking pictures again, but only in cities, only in crowds. We don't do road trips anymore. Don't stop at scenic spots along empty roads. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if we'd been just a little slower, if that turn hadn't been there, if that village hadn't existed. The detective emailed us after the trial concluded. Both men got life sentences. They'd found remains at 3 different locations, all near abandoned farms they'd been using. She said we were the only witnesses who'd ever gotten away. Philippe from the village sent us a message through the police, saying the cafe owner wanted us to know we'd always have a place at his table if we ever came back. We won't. Some places, some moments, they change you permanently. I still see that empty road sometimes when I close my eyes, feel that van right on our bumper, patient and certain. But we survived. We got away. And because of Jess's quick thinking with that camera, those men will never drag anything wrapped in a tarp ever again. The 4 of us were heading up to my uncle's cabin in the mountains that Friday night in early September. I was 24, fresh out of college, working my first real job at an accounting firm in Phoenix. My buddy Kevin was driving his Jeep Cherokee, with his girlfriend Ashley in the passenger seat, and me and my roommate Brandon in the back. We'd planned this weekend getaway for months, desperately needing a break from the city heat and our mind-numbing routines. The cabin sat about 3 hours north, nestled deep in the pine forests where cell service basically didn't exist. Kevin had suggested we leave after work to avoid traffic, which meant we wouldn't hit the mountain roads until well past 10 at night. None of us minded, though. We were young, excited, and had a cooler full of beer and enough junk food to last us through Sunday. The first 2 hours flew by with us singing along to old songs, telling stupid jokes, and Ashley occasionally grabbing the wheel when Kevin tried to air drum to his favorite parts. Once we turned off the interstate onto Highway 87, things got quieter. The road narrowed to 2 lanes and the streetlights disappeared completely. Our headlights carved through pitch-black darkness, with towering pines creating walls on both sides of the asphalt. Brandon had fallen asleep against the window, snoring softly, and Ashley was scrolling through her downloaded Netflix episodes since we'd lost signal about 20 minutes back. I remember staring out at the darkness, catching glimpses of reflective eyes, probably deer or elk, disappearing into the forest as we passed. The temperature had dropped from 90 to maybe 60 degrees, and Kevin had turned the heat on low, making everyone drowsy. We still had about 40 minutes of winding mountain roads ahead of us, and I was fighting to keep my eyes open, thinking about that cold beer waiting for us at the cabin. Around 10:45, we came around a sharp bend, and Kevin hit the brakes hard enough to jolt everyone awake. About 50 yards ahead, a dark blue minivan sat diagonally across both lanes with its hazard lights blinking in that steady, hypnotic rhythm. The vehicle looked older, maybe early 2000s, with rust eating through the wheel wells and a cracked rear window held together with duct tape. Kevin slowed to maybe 15 miles per hour, scanning for a way around it. The shoulder on the right dropped off into a steep ravine, and the left side pressed against a rocky cliff face. Ashley sat up straighter, asking if we should help, assuming it was a breakdown. Something about the scene made my chest tighten. The van's engine was still running. I could see exhaust fumes drifting in our headlights, and both front doors hung wide open like wings. No one stood near the vehicle waving for help, no flashlight beams searching for whatever problem had caused them to stop. The forest around us had gone completely silent, not even the usual cricket chirps or owl calls you'd expect on a warm September night. Kevin inched forward, trying to see if he could squeeze past on the narrow shoulder, when movement caught my eye near the tree line. 2 figures stepped out from behind thick pine trunks on opposite sides of the road, maybe 20 feet from the van. The one on the left was tall and lanky, wearing what looked like dirty work coveralls, carrying something long in his right hand, maybe a tire iron or a piece of rebar. The other guy was shorter but built thick, with a baseball cap pulled low, and what was definitely a wooden baseball bat resting on his shoulder. They moved slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world, their faces hidden in shadow beyond our headlight beams. Brandon grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks, and Ashley made this small, whimpering sound that I'll never forget. Kevin didn't need anyone to tell him what to do. He slammed the Jeep into reverse, tires squealing against the asphalt as we flew backward into the darkness, the transmission whining from the sudden strain. The problem with mountain roads is that they're not designed for driving in reverse at 40 miles per hour. Kevin kept his eyes glued to the rear-view mirror while I twisted around to help guide him, shouting warnings about the curves coming up. The Jeep fishtailed dangerously close to the guardrail, and I could hear gravel spraying up into the undercarriage. Behind us, or in front of us now, the minivan's headlights suddenly blazed to life, high beams cutting through the night like searchlights. The engine roared as it straightened out and started following us. Those 2 men must have jumped in fast because within seconds that beat-up van was gaining on us, close enough that I could make out the spider web of cracks across its windshield. Ashley was screaming at Kevin to go faster. Brandon was frantically trying to get his phone to work, holding it up toward the window like that would magically give us signal. The van stayed maybe 10 feet from our front bumper, swerving whenever Kevin swerved, matching our speed perfectly like some twisted game of tag, where we all knew what would happen if they actually caught us. After what felt like hours but was probably 90 seconds, we reached a slightly wider section where the road had been cut into the mountainside for a scenic overlook. Kevin cranked the wheel hard, spinning us around in a move that would have been impressive if we weren't all certain we were about to die. The Jeep's tires screamed and smoked as we did a complete 180, narrowly missing the stone barrier that separated the overlook from a 500-foot drop. Now facing the right direction, Kevin floored it, the engine roaring as we shot forward. The minivan tried to follow our maneuver but wasn't as lucky. They overshot the turn and had to stop completely to avoid going over the edge, giving us maybe a 30-second lead. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack my ribs, and I could taste copper in my mouth from biting my tongue during that spin. We flew through the darkness at speeds that would have been insane even in broad daylight, taking curves without slowing down, feeling the Jeep lift slightly on two wheels more than once. The minivan reappeared in our mirrors about 2 minutes later, and this time they weren't alone. A second set of headlights had joined them, a pickup truck from what I could tell, riding right beside the van like they were in formation. They knew these roads better than us. That much was obvious from how they navigated the curves without losing speed. Kevin was pushing the Cherokee to its absolute limit, the speedometer hovering around 75 on roads meant for 35. And still they gained on us inch by inch. Ashley had gone quiet, her knuckles white from gripping the dashboard, while Brandon kept muttering prayers under his breath, and he hadn't been to church since middle school. The check engine light started flashing, probably from the abuse we were putting the vehicle through, and I could smell burning rubber mixing with hot metal. Every shadow could hide another vehicle waiting to cut us off. Every straight stretch of road felt like a trap about to spring. The forest flew by in a blur of black and green, our headlights barely illuminating the road fast enough for Kevin to react to the curves ahead. Then Brandon shouted something that made everyone's head snap toward him. He had one bar of signal. His fingers fumbled with the phone as he dialed 911, nearly dropping it when we hit a pothole that sent us airborne for a second. The call connected just as we saw lights ahead. Not vehicle lights, but building lights. A gas station, one of those old mom-and-pop places that somehow survived in the middle of nowhere, its neon beer signs flickering in the window. Kevin didn't slow down until the last possible second, cranking the wheels so hard that we skidded sideways into the parking lot, stopping inches from the gas pumps. Brandon was screaming our location into the phone while we all turned to watch the road. The minivan and pickup truck slowed as they passed, not stopping but not speeding away either, like predators deciding if their prey was worth entering unfamiliar territory for. Through the gas station's dirty windows, I could see the elderly owner reaching for something under his counter. Hopefully, a phone, maybe something else. The vehicles made 2 more slow passes while we huddled in that fluorescent island of safety. Brandon still on with dispatch before finally disappearing into the night. The state police arrived 23 minutes later. I know because I watched every second tick by on the gas station's old Coca-Cola clock. 2 cruisers pulled up with their lights flashing but sirens off, and the officers took our statements while we stood there shaking despite the warm night air. The elderly store owner, a Vietnam vet named Frank with faded tattoos covering his forearms, told the cops this wasn't the first time he'd seen something like this. Apparently, there'd been 3 similar incidents over the past 2 months, always late at night, always targeting out-of-towners heading up to vacation cabins. The officers had us describe everything we could remember: the van's broken window, the tall man's coveralls, the pickup truck that joined the chase. They wrote it all down, gave us a case number, and told us they'd escort us back to Phoenix if we wanted. Kevin's Jeep was making unhealthy grinding noises by then, probably needed a new transmission after what we'd put it through. Ashley hadn't stopped crying since we'd pulled into the gas station, and Brandon's hand still shook as he tried to drink the coffee Frank had given us for free. We didn't go to the cabin that weekend. The police followed us all the way back to the interstate, and we drove home in complete silence except for the grinding sound from the Jeep's engine. None of us wanted to talk about how close we'd come to whatever those men had planned, or think about what might have happened if that gas station hadn't been there. Kevin had to replace his transmission, cost him $3,000 he didn't have. But he said it was the best money he'd ever spent. The detective assigned to our case called a few weeks later to tell us they'd found the van abandoned and burned about 15 miles from where we'd encountered it. No plates, VIN number filed off. They never found the men or the pickup truck. He said we were lucky, that most people who stopped for vehicles blocking those mountain roads didn't make it to a gas station to tell their story. I haven't driven through mountains at night since then. Don't care if it means leaving at 4 a.m. or paying for a motel room to wait until daylight. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 minutes from when we first saw the van until we reached the gas station, but it rearranged something fundamental in how I see the world. I used to think danger was something that happened in bad neighborhoods or war zones, not on scenic mountain highways where families go camping and couples take romantic weekend trips. Brandon moved back to his parents' house in Iowa 2 months after that night. Said he couldn't handle living somewhere so isolated anymore. Ashley and Kevin broke up not long after. She blamed him for taking that route. He blamed himself for suggesting we leave at night, and neither of them could get past what happened. I still see Kevin sometimes at the grocery store or getting gas, and we nod at each other but never talk about that night. There's this unspoken understanding that we survived something together, but acknowledging it out loud would make it too real again, would bring back the taste of copper and the sound of Ashley's whimpering and the sight of those two figures stepping out from the trees like they owned the darkness itself. I found out later from Frank's nephew, who works at the auto parts store where Kevin got his transmission fixed, that the old man had a shotgun under that counter and would have used it if those men had tried to follow us into his parking lot. He'd been robbed twice when he first opened the station 40 years ago and decided he'd never be a victim again. Sometimes I think about those other people the detective mentioned, the ones who didn't make it to a gas station, and I wonder if they had families still searching for answers, still driving those mountain roads in daylight looking for any sign of what happened. The police theorized it was either a robbery scheme or something worse, maybe connected to drug trafficking through those isolated corridors, but without catching anyone, it was all just speculation. All I know for certain is that we were meant to stop that night, meant to get out of our vehicle for whatever reason those men had planned, and the only thing that saved us was Kevin's instinct to reverse instead of trying to help. That split-second decision, that basic animal recognition of a trap, that's what separated us from becoming another unsolved case file in some detective's drawer. And that's why I'm sharing this story here, hoping maybe it'll help someone else recognize the signs, trust their gut when every rational part of their brain is saying to be a good person and help someone in need on a dark road. Most people think budget trips are just about cheap hostels and instant noodles, but mine turned into something I still can't talk about without feeling sick. I was 21, finishing my junior year at college in Michigan, and my roommates convinced me to join them for spring break in Charleston. We found this apartment rental through some sketchy website that promised authentic local living for half the price of hotels. The place was on King Street, right above a vintage clothing store that blasted jazz music until midnight. 4 of us crammed into a 2-bedroom walk-up with peeling yellow wallpaper and a kitchen that smelled permanently like old grease. But we didn't care. We were there to explore the city, hit the beaches, and drink overpriced cocktails we couldn't afford. The trouble started on our 3rd night there, a Wednesday in early March, when the air was still cool enough to need a jacket after sunset. We'd spent the day walking through the historic district, taking those stupid tourist photos where you pretend to hold up old church steeples between your fingers. My friends, Megan, Sophia, and Claire, wanted to try this seafood place everyone on Instagram was raving about. The restaurant was maybe 15 minutes from our rental, one of those trendy spots with exposed brick walls and Edison bulb lighting. We stayed longer than planned because Claire started flirting with our waiter, this guy with sleeve tattoos, who kept bringing us free appetizers. By the time we left, it was past 11, and the streets had that eerie emptiness that tourist areas get after the shops close. Walking back, we were loud and giggly, our voices echoing off the shuttered storefronts. Sophia kept doing this terrible impression of the waiter's southern accent, and Megan was filming everything on her phone for her travel vlog that maybe 12 people watched. The vintage store beneath our apartment was dark, its mannequins looking creepy behind the glass, dressed in 70s polyester suits. I remember noticing our apartment windows were lit up, all of them. Even the bathroom we always kept dark, because the overhead bulb was too harsh. My first thought was that Claire, who'd been complaining about the electricity bill already, would throw a fit about someone leaving everything on. The street door to our stairwell was propped open with a brick, which wasn't unusual since the lock had been broken when we arrived and the landlord said he'd fix it, eventually. But when we climbed those narrow stairs, the wood creaking under our weight like it always did, I saw our apartment door was wrong. The door frame around the lock was splintered, long pale scratches in the dark wood like someone had jammed something metal in there and twisted hard. The door itself was open maybe 6 inches, and through the gap, I could hear movement, drawers sliding, papers rustling, the specific sound of someone going through things that weren't theirs. Megan grabbed my wrist so tight her acrylic nails left marks that lasted for days. We all went completely silent, that kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat and everyone else's breathing. Through that gap, I could see a shadow moving across the living room wall, too tall and broad to be anyone we knew. Claire started backing down the stairs, but the old wood betrayed us with a groan that sounded like a scream in the quiet hallway. The movement inside stopped immediately. We heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, coming toward the door. I wanted to run, every instinct screaming at me to get out, but my legs wouldn't work right, like those nightmares where you need to escape but can't move fast enough. The door swung open wider and there he was, a man in a faded denim jacket with oil stains on the sleeves, maybe 40 years old, with this patchy beard and eyes that were too wide, too bright, like he was high on something. He had Sophia's makeup bag in one hand, the expensive one her mom bought her for Christmas, and lipsticks were spilling out onto the floor, rolling toward our feet like bloody little bullets. He didn't run when he saw us, which was somehow worse than if he had. Instead, he smiled. Not a normal smile, but this slow stretch of his mouth that showed teeth that were mostly gold caps and gaps. "Well," he said, and his voice was weirdly calm, almost friendly, with this thick Carolina drawl, "Y'all are back early." He stepped into the doorway, filling it completely, and I realized the only way out was through him. The stairwell was too narrow to squeeze past, and behind us was nothing but a 3-story drop to concrete. He kept talking, casual as anything, about how the door was already broken when he got there, how he was just looking for his girlfriend's stuff. She used to live here, maybe we knew her. His free hand kept moving to his jacket pocket, patting something there, something with weight that made the fabric hang wrong. Sophia was the first to find her voice, though it came out high and tight. "Take whatever you want," she said. "We won't call anyone, just please leave." But he laughed at that, this wheezing sound like an old car trying to start, and took a step toward us. We all moved back in unison, pressed against each other on that narrow landing. The stairs behind us creaked dangerously. These weren't built for 4 people standing in the same spot. He started describing the apartment's layout, proving he'd been through everything. Knew about Claire's hidden cash in the tampon box, Megan's prescription bottles in the nightstand, my laptop under the couch cushions where I thought it was safe. He knew which bed each of us slept in, said he could tell by the perfume on the pillows. That detail made my whole body go numb, thinking about this stranger smelling our pillows, touching our sheets, going through our dirty laundry. Then we heard it, sirens getting closer. Not because anyone called them, but Charleston police were always circling the tourist areas at night. His whole demeanor changed instantly, that fake friendliness dropping away like a mask. "You little bitches called them?" he snarled, spit flying from his mouth. Megan, brave stupid Megan, held up her phone. She'd been recording the whole time, live streaming to her Instagram. "Everyone's watching," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "My followers already called 911. It was a lie. She had maybe 50 followers and the video was just recording locally. But he didn't know that. He lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, and that's when Claire did something I'll never forget. She had her keys between her fingers and she swung hard, catching him across the cheek, leaving 3 parallel gashes that immediately started bleeding. He stumbled back, cursing, his hand flying to his face, and that gave us our opening. We rushed forward all at once, a tangle of bodies and screaming. I remember slamming into his shoulder, the smell of him, sweat and something chemical, like paint thinner. Sophia grabbed the stair railing and used it to swing herself around him. Claire kept hitting him with her keys, wild and desperate. Megan threw Sophia's makeup bag at his head, and powder exploded everywhere, turning the air pink and glittery. For a few seconds, it was pure chaos. Him trying to grab us fighting to get past. Everyone shouting. His hand caught my hair and yanked hard enough that I heard strands ripping out. But I twisted away, leaving him with a fistful of blonde while I tumbled down the stairs after my friends. We burst onto the street just as a police cruiser was passing. Megan ran straight into traffic, waving her arms, nearly getting hit by the car as it screeched to a stop. The officer got out, hand on his weapon, probably thinking we were drunk college kids causing trouble. But then he saw our faces. Claire had blood on her keys and hands. My scalp was bleeding where hair had been torn out. We were all covered in pink powder and crying. Behind us, we could hear the man crashing through the apartment, and then the fire escape clanging. The officer called for backup immediately while pushing us behind his vehicle. 2 more cruisers arrived within minutes, but when they searched the apartment and surrounding blocks, he was gone. All they found was our ransacked belongings, a meth pipe in the bathroom that wasn't ours, and a backpack full of stolen items from other vacation rentals in the area. The police took our statements until almost 4 in the morning, and the detective, this exhausted-looking woman named Officer Paulson, told us this had been happening all month. The guy targeted vacation rentals specifically because tourists rarely pressed charges. They just wanted to go home. She showed us security footage from the vintage store below, and there he was from 2 days earlier, testing our street door during daylight, pretending to browse the shop while actually casing the building. We'd probably walked right past him. The landlord finally showed up around dawn, reeking of bourbon, and had the nerve to blame us for leaving valuables in the apartment. He wouldn't even pay for a hotel, said the apartment was still technically habitable. We spent the rest of the night in the living room, all 4 of us in a pile on the couch, taking turns staying awake while the others dozed. Every sound made us jump, the jazz music starting up again downstairs, a cat on the fire escape, drunk people arguing on the street. We left Charleston that same day, driving straight through to Michigan in Megan's beat-up Toyota, stopping only for gas and drive-through coffee. None of us talked about it during the ride, just played music too loud and pretended to sleep. But I know we were all thinking the same thing, about him knowing which bed was whose, about what he might have done if we'd come back alone, or if we'd been asleep when he broke in. The police never caught him, though Officer Paulson emailed me a few weeks later saying they'd connected him to 7 other break-ins. Claire needed therapy for months afterward, and Sophia still can't stay in ground-floor apartments. As for me, I check every lock 3 times before bed, and I've never used a vacation rental again. Hotels might be expensive, but at least they have security cameras and deadbolts that actually work. The worst vacation of my life happened 2 years ago at what was supposed to be a paradise in Barbados. My husband Tom and I had saved for months to afford 5 nights at the Crystal Sands Resort, one of those places where everything's included and you're not supposed to worry about anything except which cocktail to order next. We'd been married for 7 years, and between his job at the warehouse and my shifts at the hospital, we desperately needed this break. The brochures showed pristine beaches, smiling staff, and couples lounging by infinity pools. What they didn't show was how isolated the resort actually was, 40 minutes from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but jungle and a single winding road that connected it to civilization. Our room was on the 3rd floor of the Sunset Wing, room 312, facing the ocean but requiring a long walk through multiple corridors to reach the main areas. Everything seemed perfect that first afternoon when we arrived around 2 o'clock. The lobby had marble floors that gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and the staff greeted us with champagne and cold towels. After checking in, we changed into our swimsuits and headed straight for the main pool, a massive lagoon-shaped thing with a swim-up bar and underwater speakers playing reggae music. That's when I first noticed him. A heavy-set man, probably in his 40s, sitting alone at the poolside bar nursing what looked like whiskey on the rocks, while everyone else had tropical drinks with umbrellas. He wore expensive-looking sunglasses and a gold chain that caught the sun, But what made me uncomfortable was how he kept adjusting his position on the bar stool to face wherever I moved in the pool. Tom was doing laps, completely oblivious while I tried to enjoy floating on a pool raft. But every time I glanced toward the bar, those sunglasses were pointed directly at me. Around 4:30, I decided to get out and dry off on one of the lounge chairs near the shallow end. Tom joined me, and we ordered piña coladas from a waiter who seemed to appear out of nowhere. They were really attentive at this place. The man at the bar had shifted again, now facing our direction even though it meant turning his back to the bartender. He had this way of pretending to check his phone while obviously watching us, holding it at an angle that didn't match someone actually reading a screen. When our drinks arrived, I mentioned it quietly to Tom, who turned to look just as the guy quickly swiveled back toward the bar. "Probably just drunk," Tom said, squeezing my hand. "These all-inclusive places, people start drinking at breakfast. But drunk people usually have trouble focusing on anything for long, and this man had been laser-focused on me for over an hour. His drink level never seemed to change either, like he was nursing it just to have an excuse to stay at that particular spot. The thing that really unsettled me was when I went to use the bathroom near the pool area. The women's room was down a little hallway past the towel station, and as I walked there, I heard footsteps behind me matching my pace exactly. When I sped up slightly, they sped up. When I stopped to pretend to check my phone, they stopped too. I spun around and there he was, about 20 feet back, suddenly very interested in a potted palm tree. He had taken off his sunglasses and his eyes were this pale gray color like dirty ice. Without the shades, I could see his face clearly. Weathered skin with deep lines around his mouth, a thin scar through his left eyebrow, and this peculiar way of breathing through his mouth that made his jaw hang slightly open. I practically ran into the bathroom and stayed there for 10 minutes, hoping he'd be gone when I came out. He was, but when I got back to the pool, he was at his spot at the bar again, sunglasses back on, facing my empty lounge chair like he'd been waiting for me to return. We left the pool area around 6 to get ready for dinner. The resort had 5 restaurants, and we'd made reservations at the steakhouse on the 2nd floor of the main building. Walking back to our room, I kept checking behind us, but the corridors were empty except for a few housekeeping carts. Tom thought I was being paranoid, but he humored me by double-checking that our door locked properly, and even putting the chain on while we showered and changed. The Sunset Wing was designed in this confusing way where you had to walk through 3 different corridors and pass 2 emergency stairwells to get from the elevators to our room. The hallways had this thick burgundy carpet that muffled footsteps completely, and the lighting was dim. Just these small sconces every few feet that created more shadows than illumination. Every room door looked identical, dark wood with gold numbers, and there were no windows in the corridors, making it feel like a maze. I remember thinking how easy it would be to get lost if you'd been drinking, how all the turns looked the same. Dinner started off perfectly normal. The restaurant was beautiful, all white tablecloths and candlelight, with windows overlooking the beach where you could see the moon reflecting off the water. We ordered wine and were halfway through our appetizers when I saw him again, seated alone at a table in the corner, partially hidden behind a decorative plant. This time he wasn't wearing sunglasses, and he'd changed into a white linen shirt that looked expensive but had yellow stains under the arms. He was cutting his steak in this methodical way, taking tiny bites while staring directly at our table. The waiter came by and asked if everything was all right because I'd stopped eating, and when I whispered that the man in the corner was making me uncomfortable, he said he'd speak to the manager. But when the manager came over 5 minutes later, the man's table was empty, just a half-eaten steak and a glass of red wine left behind. The manager apologized and offered us free dessert, saying some guests overindulged and forgot their manners. Tom tried to lighten the mood by joking about it, but I couldn't stop thinking about how the man knew exactly which restaurant we'd chosen out of 5 options. After dinner, Tom suggested we check out the casino on the ground floor, but I just wanted to go back to the room. My nerves were shot, and the wine wasn't helping. The walk back to room 312 felt longer than before, and I kept hearing things. A door clicking shut somewhere behind us, The elevator arriving even though we hadn't called it. Footsteps that seemed to stop whenever we stopped. Tom was getting frustrated with my jumpiness, saying I was ruining our vacation over some lonely weirdo who probably did this to women all the time. When we finally reached our door, I made Tom check inside the room first while I waited in the hallway. He thought I was being ridiculous, but he did it anyway, even checking the bathroom and the closet. We locked up tight, deadbolt, chain, and Tom even wedged a chair under the door handle as a joke to make me feel better. We watched some movie on TV, and by 11 o'clock I was starting to feel silly about the whole thing. Tom was already snoring beside me when I finally drifted off, the sound of the ocean waves through our balcony door almost drowning out my lingering anxiety. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of metal scraping against metal. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, the distinctive sound of a key card being inserted into our door's lock. The little light on the lock flashed red, and there was a muffled curse from the other side. Tom was still dead asleep, so I shook him hard while watching the door handle, which was now jiggling violently. Someone was trying different key cards, sliding them in and out, and each time the light flashed red, the person would grunt and try again. The chair Tom had wedged against the door started to shift slightly with each attempt to push the door open. I whispered Tom's name urgently, and he finally woke up, confused until he heard the next scrape of a card in the lock. We both sat there in the dark, completely still, watching the door handle turn back and forth. Then came the knocking. Not normal knocking, but this slow, deliberate rhythm. 3 knocks, pause, 3 knocks, pause. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute or two. Then the voice started, low and slurred, like he'd been drinking heavily since dinner. "I know you're awake in there, saw your shadow move under the door." His mouth was so close to the door gap that we could hear his breathing, wet and labored. "Just wanted to talk. You were so friendly at the pool. Why aren't you friendly now?" Tom grabbed his phone to call security, but I grabbed his wrist. I was terrified that any sound we made would escalate things. The man outside continued his monologue, voice getting progressively more agitated. "Room 312, easy to remember, 3 + 1 + 2 = 6, my lucky number." He laughed at this, a wheezy sound that turned into a cough. "That husband of yours, he's sleeping, isn't he? Heavy sleeper." I watched him at dinner, saw him drink those 3 glasses of wine. Bet he won't wake up for anything. The door handle rattled again, more violently this time, and we heard him slam his shoulder against the door. The chain held, but the sound was so loud I was sure other guests would hear. But no one came out to check, no voices in the hallway, nothing. Tom finally called security while I called the front desk simultaneously. The woman who answered sounded half asleep and asked me to repeat myself twice before she understood. Meanwhile, the man outside had started sliding something under our door. Business cards, dozens of them, all blank except for a handwritten phone number. He kept talking while he did it, describing my bathing suit, the color of my nail polish, the exact spot where I'd applied sunscreen at the pool. "You missed a spot on your left shoulder," he said. "It's probably red now." I could help with that. Tom was on the phone with security, giving our room number, but they said they were on the opposite side of the resort dealing with another issue, and it would take at least 10 minutes to get someone to us. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. The man outside had gone quiet for a moment, and then we heard the sound of liquid hitting our door, followed by the unmistakable smell of urine. He was urinating on our door while humming some tune I didn't recognize. Tom lost it then, shouting that he was calling the police, that he had a weapon, anything to make the guy leave. But the man just laughed and said, "No cell service out here for regular phones. Only the resort phones work. And the police? 45 minutes away if they hurry." The next few minutes were the longest of my life. We pushed the dresser in front of the door, then the desk, creating a barricade while the man outside alternated between pounding on the door and periods of eerie silence where we could only hear his breathing. During one of those quiet moments, we heard him talking to someone else. Another male voice, younger sounding, asking what he was doing. The man said I was his wife, and I'd locked him out after an argument. The other voice seemed skeptical but walked away after the man insisted everything was fine. That's when real panic set in because I realized he was coherent enough to lie convincingly to strangers. He wasn't just some drunk guest. He was calculating. Tom grabbed the lamp from the nightstand, ready to use it as a weapon if the man somehow got through. I was in the bathroom filling the ice bucket with scalding hot water from the tap, thinking I could throw it if needed. We heard him trying the balcony next. Our room was on the 3rd floor, but there was a narrow ledge that connected the balconies, and he was out there trying to shimmy across from the adjacent room. Tom rushed to lock the sliding door just as we saw his silhouette appear at the edge of our balcony. Security finally arrived at 3:19 a.m. I know the exact time because I'd been staring at the clock, counting every second. We heard shouting in the hallway, the man's voice getting higher and more frantic, claiming we'd invited him and then changed our minds. There was a scuffle, the sound of someone being slammed against the wall, and then multiple voices as more security arrived. The head of security knocked on our door, identifying himself and sliding his ID under so we could verify it was really him. When we finally opened the door, the hallway reeked of urine, and there were those business cards scattered everywhere. They took our statements. Tom showed them photos he'd taken of the man through the peephole, and they assured us he was being held until the police arrived. Turns out he wasn't even a guest at the resort. He'd been sneaking in for weeks, using a stolen staff keycard to access different areas. They found him living in a maintenance room in the basement, with dozens of photos on his phone of female guests, including several of me from that day. The resort moved us to a different room, comped our entire stay, and begged us not to post about it online. We left the next morning anyway, driving straight to the airport even though our flight wasn't for 3 more days. I still have nightmares about those pale gray eyes and that wet, raspy breathing against our door. The heat in Chicago that July afternoon was the kind that made the pavement shimmer like water. I was there with my college roommate Vanessa, celebrating our graduation with a week-long trip we'd been planning since freshman year. We'd just finished lunch at this tiny Vietnamese place in Chinatown when we decided to walk toward the Art Institute. Vanessa had her camera out, taking photos of everything: the red pagoda-style buildings, the hanging lanterns, even the graffiti on the brick walls. We were 22, invincible, and completely unaware that within the next hour, we'd be fighting to get out of a nightmare we'd walked ourselves into. I still remember the taste of that last iced coffee I was sipping, sweet and cold, before everything went wrong. The man approached us near the corner of Cermak and Wentworth, where the tourist shops start thinning out and the neighborhood gets quieter. He looked like any other local, maybe 45, wearing a Cubs jersey and khaki shorts with this genuine, warm smile that reminded me of my Uncle Gary. He had a slight limp and carried a worn leather messenger bag across his shoulder. "Excuse me, ladies," he said, pulling out his phone to show us he was part of some community group. "I run free walking tours for visitors, trying to show people the real Chicago, not just the tourist traps. I've got about 40 minutes before my next paid group, and I hate walking alone. Would you like to see some hidden architectural gems just 3 blocks from here?" His phone screen showed what looked like a legitimate Facebook page with hundreds of reviews and photos of smiling tourists. Vanessa and I exchanged glances, and she shrugged. We were already wandering aimlessly anyway. He introduced himself as Doug and started walking, pointing out details about the buildings as we went: the year they were built, which families owned them, little historical facts that seemed too specific to be made up. He knew which restaurant used to be a speakeasy, which alley was used in a movie from the 80s. He even stopped to pet a cat that was lounging on a stoop, calling it by name. "Hey there, Patches." And the cat actually came to him. Every detail made him seem more legitimate, more like just a friendly local who loved his city. Vanessa was recording parts of his commentary on her phone, and I was taking mental notes for the travel blog I'd promised myself I'd start. We turned down a narrower street where the buildings were older, more industrial, with those old fire escapes zigzagging down the facades. Doug pointed to a building ahead with boarded-up windows on the ground floor, but ornate stonework around what used to be the entrance. "This one's special," Doug said, fishing out a key from his messenger bag. "Built in 1892 as a printing press, then converted to apartments in the 50s. The owner lets me bring small groups through because we're trying to get it designated as a historical landmark. The interior still has the original tin ceilings and marble stairs." He unlocked a side door that looked recently installed. Metal, modern, completely out of place with the old brick. The hallway inside was dim but not dark. Sunlight filtered through dirty windows at the far end. It smelled like dust and old wood, maybe a hint of pigeon droppings, but nothing that screamed danger. Vanessa went in first, her camera already up, capturing the peeling paint and exposed brick. I followed, and Doug came in behind us, still talking about the building's history, his voice echoing slightly in the empty space. The door clicked shut behind him, and that's when I noticed it. The sound was different from a normal door closing, heavier somehow, more final. Doug led us deeper into the building, up a set of stairs that creaked under our weight. The marble he'd mentioned was there, but covered in decades of grime. On the second floor, he pushed open a door to what he called the showcase room. And I'll admit, it was impressive at first. High ceilings with intricate tin patterns, tall windows with antique glass that warped the view outside, built-in wooden shelving that must have held thousands of books once. Vanessa was in photographer heaven, crouching to get angles, adjusting her lens. Doug stood by the doorway, scrolling through his phone, and I noticed he'd positioned himself between us and the exit. "Take your time," he said, that warm smile still there. "I'll just let my next group know I'm running a few minutes late." He typed something quickly, and I heard a faint buzzing from somewhere else in the building, like another phone vibrating in response. The change happened fast. Doug's whole demeanor shifted like someone had flipped a switch. The friendly tour guide expression melted away, replaced by something calculating and cold. He put his phone in his pocket and pulled out something else, a thick zip tie. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice completely different now, flat and matter-of-fact. "Your friend is going to put her expensive camera in my bag. You're going to add your phones, wallets, and jewelry. Then we're going to have a conversation about pins and passwords." Vanessa spun around, her face going pale when she saw what he was holding. I tried to move toward the door, but Doug stepped fully into the frame, blocking it. He was bigger than I'd realized, the limp from earlier completely gone. "The windows are painted shut, ladies. The fire escape was removed years ago, and my partner downstairs has already locked the main entrance. You can cooperate, or we can do this differently. But either way, you're not leaving until we get what we need." My mind went into overdrive, calculating options while trying to keep my face neutral. Vanessa's hands were trembling as she clutched her camera, a Canon her parents had given her for graduation, worth at least $3,000. I remembered something from a self-defense class I'd taken junior year. Never let them take you to a second location, and we were already in one. But the instructor had also said sometimes compliance is survival, especially when outnumbered. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll cooperate, just nobody needs to get hurt, right?" Doug nodded, but his eyes stayed hard, watching us like we were unpredictable animals. I slowly reached for my crossbody bag, making a show of opening it. Inside, along with my wallet, was a small canister of pepper spray attached to my keys. It was one of those legal ones, not very strong, but maybe enough if I could get close. The problem was Doug maintained his distance, clearly experienced at this. That's when we heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the empty building. Doug's partner appeared in the doorway, and my heart sank even further. She was maybe 30, wearing yoga clothes like she'd just come from a gym, blonde hair in a messy bun, the kind of person you'd ask for directions without thinking twice. She was carrying a backpack and had latex gloves on. "These two?" she asked Doug like we were items on a shopping list. "Yeah, the camera alone will cover this month's rent," he replied. The woman approached Vanessa first, probably because she looked more scared. "Camera first, honey, nice and slow." As Vanessa lifted the camera strap over her head, I saw something that gave me the tiniest spark of hope. Her phone was still recording video in her jacket pocket. the lens barely visible. She'd never stopped recording when Doug had revealed himself. If we could somehow get out of here, we'd have evidence. But first, we had to survive. The woman was going through Vanessa's bag when we heard it. Sirens getting closer. Not just one or two, but multiple emergency vehicles. Doug and his partner exchanged a quick glance, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in their eyes. The woman walked quickly to one of the tall windows, peering through the warped glass. "Fire trucks," she said, "3 of them. They're stopping at the warehouse 2 blocks over." Doug relaxed slightly, but I didn't. This was our chance. I started coughing, violent, hacking coughs that bent me over double. "I can't breathe," I gasped between coughs. "Asthma inhaler in my bag." It was a complete lie, but I sold it hard, wheezing, clutching at my throat. Vanessa caught on immediately. "Oh my God, she's having an attack. This happened in finals week. She needs her inhaler now or she could die." The panic in her voice was real, even if the reason wasn't. I dropped to my knees, making horrible wheezing sounds I remembered from when my roommate freshman year had an actual asthma attack. The woman looked annoyed, but also worried. A dead tourist would bring way too much heat. "Get her inhaler," she snapped at Doug. He grabbed my bag roughly, dumping its contents on the dusty floor. While he was distracted searching through my things, I watched the woman's position. She'd moved closer to help look, leaving the doorway partially clear. My pepper spray had rolled under some old newspapers when Doug emptied my bag. I kept up the wheezing, adding some convincing gasps, watching them both crouch down, focused on finding an inhaler that didn't exist. Then I made my move. I grabbed the pepper spray, flicked the safety off with my thumb, and sprayed it directly up into Doug's face from maybe 2 feet away. He screamed, hands flying to his eyes, stumbling backward. The woman lunged for me, but Vanessa swung her camera bag hard, catching her in the side of the head. The $1,000 lens inside made a satisfying crack against her skull. We didn't wait to see if they'd recover. We just ran. We flew down those marble stairs, taking 3 at a time, our sneakers slapping against the stone, the sounds of Doug's cursing and the woman's shouting echoing behind us. The main door was locked, as they'd said, but there was a window next to it, one of those old single-pane ones. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She picked up a broken piece of concrete from the floor and smashed it straight through. Glass exploded outward, and we could hear Doug stumbling down the stairs behind us, still half blind but coming fast. I knocked out the remaining shards with my elbow, cutting my arm in the process but not caring, and we squeezed through. We hit the street running and didn't stop. A man walking his dog stared as we sprinted past, Vanessa still clutching her camera bag with its broken lens, my arm bleeding through my shirt. We ran for 4 blocks before we saw a police car parked outside a Walgreens. I've never been so happy to see cops in my life. The rest happened in a blur. The officers called for backup immediately when Vanessa showed them the video on her phone. Doug's face was clear as day, talking about his partner downstairs and mentioning the exits being blocked. They found the building within an hour, but Doug and the woman were gone. However, the cops found something else. Personal items from at least a dozen other victims hidden in a locked room in the basement. Driver's licenses, credit cards, even a few passports. Turns out they'd been running this scam for months, targeting tourists in different neighborhoods, always moving around. The detective told us we were lucky. Most victims had been too scared or embarrassed to fight back, and several had been held for hours while the pair maxed out their credit cards and bank accounts. They caught Doug 3 weeks later trying the same thing in Milwaukee. The woman was never found. I still have a scar on my arm from that window. This thin white line that reminds me every day how close we came to being just another statistic. Vanessa and I finished our Chicago trip, but we stuck to the main tourist areas after that, always in groups, never trusting anyone who approached us on the street. And that travel blog I was going to start? The first post was about how to spot tourist scams. It went viral. I went to the desert festival that year mostly for the escape. Back then, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and living with my cousin in a cramped apartment near the city. So a weekend surrounded by music, endless sky, and friends felt like exactly what I needed. We'd driven out in 2 cars, packed with tents, coolers, and more sunscreen than food. The place was massive, a sprawl of makeshift campsites dotted with flags, fairy lights, and the constant low hum of bass rolling over the sand. During the day, the heat wrapped around you like a heavy blanket. But once the sun dipped, the air turned sharp and cool, and the desert felt like a different world. On the second night, we'd all gone to one of the main stages to see a band my friend Danielle had been raving about for months. The crowd was thick, the kind of press where strangers brush past you every few seconds, and neon lights blurred in my vision with each turn of my head. Somewhere between getting pulled into a dance circle and queuing for overpriced lemonade, I lost track of my group. Normally I wouldn't have cared. I've got a decent sense of direction. But at that festival, after dark, everything looked the same. I wandered for a while, thinking I'd spot our flag or the glow-in-the-dark tape Danielle had wrapped around our tent poles. It was when I was cutting between 2 rows of parked RVs that I noticed a guy leaning against the hood of a dusty silver SUV. He wasn't dressed like most people there. No glitter, no tie-dye, just a dark windbreaker and jeans. His hands tucked into the pockets like he had nowhere particular to be. When our eyes met, he gave a small nod, like he recognized me. And that's when it clicked. I'd seen him earlier in the day hanging a few feet from our campsite. I didn't remember talking to him, but I remembered the way he seemed to just linger, watching people set up. He asked if I was headed back to camp and said he could give me a ride. Long walk in the dark, he added, gesturing toward the distant scatter of lights where the campsites were. My phone battery was nearly dead, and the idea of weaving through the dark paths alone made me hesitate. His SUV looked familiar enough that I convinced myself he was probably a friend of someone in our group. I climbed into the passenger seat, telling myself I'd be back at the tent in 5 minutes. Halfway down the main road, the SUV's headlights caught a swirl of dust ahead, and instead of continuing toward the glow of the camps, he slowed and flicked on his turn signal. I thought maybe he was taking a shortcut, but the tires crunched onto a narrow dirt track that veered away from the festival. Out here, the only light came from the moon, and the beams from the headlights barely reached beyond the curve of the road. I asked if this was the right way, and he said, "Yeah, trust me, it's quicker." His voice was calm, almost too casual, like we weren't suddenly heading into pitch-black desert. The deeper we went, the more I realized how far we were getting from any sign of the festival. The music had faded into nothing, replaced by the steady hum of the engine and the occasional ping of gravel against the undercarriage. Sagebrush blurred past, and every so often the headlights would catch a cluster of rocks that looked like figures until we got close. My phone had dipped into the dreaded no service zone, and the battery icon was down to a single red sliver. I kept glancing at it, willing a bar of reception to pop up, while he kept his eyes locked on the road. After a few minutes, we passed a rusted-out water tank and what looked like the skeletal frame of an old shed. He slowed again, scanning the dark beyond the windshield like he was looking for something specific. That's when I started noticing little things. The way his knuckles tightened slightly on the steering wheel, the faint scent of cigarette smoke baked into the upholstery, the faint click of his tongue against his teeth every so often. I didn't know what lay ahead on that dirt road, but the idea of getting there with him suddenly felt like the worst plan I'd ever agreed to. I tried to play it off, asking casually how he knew the festival, who he came with, but his answers were short and vague. "Met some people," he said, then nothing more. No names, no details. The wind rattled the passenger side mirror, and I found myself focusing on that sound, counting each rattle as if it might anchor me. Somewhere up ahead, a faint orange glow flickered between the ridges, not like the steady light of the camps, but more like a fire. He steered toward it without hesitation. The orange glow grew brighter as we approached, until the shape of a small open clearing came into view. In the middle sat a metal drum, flames licking out of the top, casting jittery shadows across the sand. A folding chair lay tipped on its side near it, and beyond that, I could barely make out the outline of some kind of shack or trailer, dark except for a sliver of light seeping through one window. He pulled up alongside the fire, put the SUV in park, and cut the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the desert air itself. He turned toward me then, and for the first time since I'd gotten in, he smiled. Not a big, welcoming grin, but something small and unreadable, like he'd been waiting for this moment. "Gotta grab something real quick," he said, reaching into his pocket. Without waiting for a reply, he got out, his boots crunching over the sand as he headed toward the trailer. Fire popped, sending a spray of sparks into the night, and I sat there gripping the seatbelt, trying to decide if getting out would be safer than staying put. I leaned over, scanning the dash for anything: keys, a phone charger, a map. But the SUV was stripped down to the basics. No personal clutter, no hint of who he was. That's when I noticed the faint hum of another engine somewhere behind us, out on the main road. It was distant but steady, and the thought hit me like a lifeline. If I could get out and flag whoever it was, maybe I could get back without having to see what he was grabbing. Sliding out of the passenger seat, I kept low and moved around to the far side of the SUV, using it as cover. My sneakers sank into the loose sand with every step, making it impossible to move quietly. But the crackle of the fire and the faint wind covered most of it. The hum of the other engine grew closer, and I stepped out from behind the SUV, waving my arms toward the road. The headlights of a pickup truck came into view on the main road, its low beams sweeping across the scrub. I stepped further into the open, waving both arms over my head. The SUV's driver must have heard me, because I caught a quick flash of movement near the trailer, his silhouette turning sharply toward me before breaking into a stride. My pulse hammered in my ears, but the truck was already slowing, its tires crunching over the gravel shoulder. A man in his 50s leaned out the driver's window, squinting at me. "You lost?" he called over the rumble of the engine. I didn't bother with details, just said I needed to get back to the festival and that my friends were looking for me. He gestured to the passenger side, and I climbed in without a glance back at the SUV. The moment the door shut, he eased the truck onto the road, heading in the opposite direction of the dirt track. In the side mirror, I saw the man from the SUV standing in the clearing, his face just beyond the reach of the firelight. We rode in silence for a while, the hum of the truck steady, the lights of the festival slowly reappearing on the horizon. The driver eventually said he'd been a vendor at the event and was heading back after packing up. He didn't ask questions, just made sure I was dropped off at a security tent near the entrance. From there, I spotted Danielle running toward me, her relief obvious even in the chaos of the crowd. I didn't tell her everything right then, just that I'd gotten turned around and found my way back. Even now, I still think about what would have happened if that truck hadn't come along when it did. The dirt road, the fire in the middle of nowhere, the way he didn't hesitate to take that turn. It's all burned into my memory. I don't know what he was planning or why he seemed to know exactly where he was going out there, but I do know I'll never again get into a stranger's car, no matter how familiar their face looks.